All right, so let's talk through Photoshop Basics Day 1. This is like the most simplistic stuff you need to know for Photoshop. We went over this in class, but if you aren't in class or you are just new to this, here you go. So at the end of this tutorial, this is what you're going to see on your screen is basically 3 layers, one layer called blue, one called yellow, and one called selection. So we're going to just get rid of all of these, and there we go. We are going to rename this to layer 0, which is what you would see if you're really just starting this from scratch. So just to give you kind of an overview of what to do in Photoshop. So you have over on the left a whole bunch of tools. This just allows you to do everything. Below that you have color swatches. You can reset those at any time by clicking this little swatch up above it. And then you can flip those by using these 2 arrows. You can also use some shortcut keys. So X on your keyboard flops those, or you can do D to reset those. So if you ever find yourself, having a green top chip and a bottom chip that's white, and you want to go back to black and white, and you don't want to go back here and click that little button, you can just quickly hit your keyboard D, and it will reset that. So those are your tools over on the left. There's a whole bunch to say about that. Up at the top, you have a whole bunch of these selection and tool windows. There's just tons of choices to make here. But the first one I want to just kind of emphasize with you is this window one. So if you find that you've really messed up your whole thing, and this will happen from time to time because things just get kind of all over the place and you've selected a whole bunch of stuff. So let's say you've like lost this tab group, you've closed this one too. So you've just lost a whole bunch of stuff and it's an awry situation. What you can do is go up to Window, and your workspace should say Essentials. Another thing that I've seen happen to people is they'll have like 3D on, and they're just like, nothing looks right. This is not what I'm familiar with, and these tools are different. So go up to Windows, Workspace, make sure it's on Essentials, and then if it's still messed up like this, you can go to Window, Workspace, and then Reset Essentials right here. That'll put everything back to normal as it was right at the beginning. Over below that, those different panels, you have, oops, I accidentally clicked the help thing. You have kind of your tool functions here. So basically, every tool you click, you notice that there's a different panel above that tool. Over on the right, you have basically every window that's open and available to you. So each of these are little tabs that you can click on. They do a whole bunch of different things. If you want to add more of these, you go up to Window and you just choose something. So for instance, one that students might use from time to time is like the histogram, because it'll show in the picture what the histogram is. Those will park right here, or you can actually pull those up into here as well. So you can add comments up there. You can close those anytime by clicking that. Notice it'll shift the size of these, and you can always move these, except for right now when I'm trying to do it. There we go. You can always move those by hovering over the edges, and then you can move that kind of stuff. All right, you'll notice this is really long right now, and I've kind of lost this down here. And that can happen, and you can actually tighten up by also pulling these different layers up or down. So I just double-clicked on the side of these as well, and it will kind of hide it or bring it up. Just double left click. So I have a layer, and again, one of the most essential things about Photoshop is understanding that there are layers. So when you have layers, you can create infinite layers. Down at the bottom here, there's a little plus in a square. And if I click that, I could create infinite layers, and I'll create 25. You could create as many as you want. To delete those, I can either go down to this trash can, and I could trash each one by left clicking it, or I can actually, on the keyboard, click the delete button. Now the backspace button also will work in this case, but the backspace button doesn't always delete. So I would encourage you to actually use that delete button on your keyboard. So if I push delete, I can delete all those back to layer 0. Now let's say another way you might have that is you might have a whole bunch of layers. So you're up to 25 layers. And you could also hold down Shift on your keyboard and then left click. And you'll notice it selects all of those layers. Then you can push delete and it deletes all of those. The last thing you might have is, let's say you have 9 layers. So you have a whole bunch of layers here. And you want to select just the odd layers from here. what you could do is, and I'll move this up here just so you can see this better, but I have 9 layers, 10 with layer 0. And if I wanted to select just the odd ones, and you're not going to arbitrarily just select the odd ones, but in some cases you want to select different layers. So I'm going to do Control on my keyboard. On a Mac it's Command, but on PC it's Control. And then left click, and you'll notice I can highlight multiple layers. Then I can push Delete on my keyboard, and those would go away. And then I'm left with these layers. And then I could use Shift, click, delete. So that's one way you can start to use layers, delete them, add them, do all that kind of stuff. Really simple here. So we just looked again at that new layer and then also the trash can there. So with this bottom layer picked, we're going to actually make 3 layers here. And this bottom layer, we're going to call this the yellow layer. To rename something, you just double left click on the layer title, double left click, and then you can call it anything else. And as you can see here, I've renamed those 3 layers yellow, blue, and red dot. So we're going to add something for the first time here in Photoshop, and we're going to come over to the left, and we have a whole bunch of tools. The tool you're going to want to click is this paint bucket tool. It's housed with the gradient tool, the paint bucket tool, and the 3D material drop tool. Each of these, if you see this little triangle in the corner, that actually is telling you that there are multiple tools here. So if you left click and hold, those tools will appear. So here, yours might actually start with the gradient tool, so it might look like this to start. So you're going to left click and hold, choose the paint bucket tool. It says yellow on this bottom layer. Make sure you're selected on this one. It's highlighted if you're selected. We're going to click on our chip, on our top chip, and we're going to make it yellow. So I can click over here, make it any yellow, it doesn't matter. And then I'm going to use my paint bucket tool, not my gradient, but my paint bucket tool, and I'm going to left click, and it drops yellow in there. Now I'm going to click on my blue layer. I'm going to go over to my chip. I'm going to go to the blue. Any blue doesn't matter. Say OK. And I'm going to, even though it's all yellow right now, you have like a transparent layer that's going to block you from actually painting it on the yellow layer. And I'm going to left click and drop blue in there. So what's cool is like these both still exist even though you can only see yellow. Or excuse me, you can only see blue. Whew. The reason for that is the blue is on top of the yellow. Imagine all of these layers as stacked layers, as maybe like a stack of pancakes. And you can only see through to below it by doing certain things. Or you can actually say, I don't want to see this anymore, and left click on this little eyeball. So if I click on that eyeball, it will go away, and then you see yellow below it. Now on this top one, we're going to add what's called a selection. So over on the left, you have these multiple tools that allow you to do different kinds of selections. So this is the marquee tool that creates like shape selections. This one is like a freeform tool for selecting. So it's a lasso tool, polygonal lasso tool. And then this one is an object selection tool. This is really nice when you have like a person that you want to select. So let's first go to this top one and let's make a little, just a rectangle so you can see this. And if I'm on my blue layer and I make a rectangle, first of all, you're going to notice that there's these little like marching dots. They call this in Photoshop marching ants. And it's basically like these little dots that go around. The reason it looks that way is you're never going to see that elsewhere in Photoshop. And so it's telling you there's a selection, because selections are basically limiting what you can do to only this area. So, for instance, if I use my paint bucket tool and I use red, so I've got my red chip placed, and I do the paint bucket tool and I drop that in there, it stays within those marching ants, that selection area. Okay. Hit Control Z to undo, Control Z. And if I actually did that on the outside, I can't do anything. Notice I'm trying to click, I'm trying to left click, you can see my mouse is changing, but it won't let me because I'm only allowed to do stuff in here right now, okay? So that's one of the key things with the selection tool. The other thing you'll notice is once I've actually placed that in there, and I do Control D to deselect, I've now actually ruined this layer. I've added that red to it. And I can't move that now. Like I can't get rid of that red. That red is stuck there. I'm actually moving it with the move tool, which is shortcut V on the keyboard, or spacebar I think goes, no, spacebar is the hand tool, sorry. V, and that'll move it around. So I've kind of ruined that. So if I want to undo it, I can do Control Z, and it's going to go away. There we go. So what I could do instead is actually put it on this empty layer. So this layer at the top is actually just empty pixels. And I can put something there, and it's on its own layer. So let's, for the red dot layer, put a dot, a circle, and this elliptical marquee tool will make like an ellipse. But if you want it to be a perfect circle, hold down Shift on your keyboard, and it will keep it as a perfect circle. That's the cool thing about Shift. So we're going to make a circle here. And now we have a circle. Nothing's in it yet because we need to use our paint bucket tool, paint red. Now notice if I click my eyeball off of this top layer, it's all blue. I can Control D to deselect. And that blue layer is totally fine now. It's still just like what it is. I could also click off that blue layer, and that red dot's on top of the yellow layer. So that dot is on its own layer. It exists on its own. So what's cool about this, and what's interesting about layers, right, and this is one of the key concepts of this whole thing, is I can actually left-click and move that layer around. So what I can do is move the red dot to the bottom, and by using certain tools, I can actually cut through the blue layer and then cut through the yellow layer to get to the red dot. So, for instance, if I go to my eraser tool, which imagine an eraser tool is like if you literally either cut through a piece of paper or like ripped through a piece of paper. The eraser is going to destroy it. So with this one selected, and if you want to make it bigger or smaller, you can use this, or cleverly, you can use the bracket keys on your keyboard. And then just one left click of the mouse, and it cuts through. And notice you're like, well, where's the red dot? That's a yellow dot. It's a yellow dot because I've cut through to this layer below it, right? When I look through blue, I'm seeing yellow, and I can't see red yet because I'm only seeing yellow. If I were to look away from this, now I can see that red, but I need to cut through this yellow as well. So I got to select that layer, and now if I cut through here, notice I've cut through this yellow layer, but I didn't cut through this blue layer, and that's really important to notice. So whatever layer I'm selected on is the only thing that got cut through, and then the red dot is at the bottom. So this whole concept of layers and how layers work is critical to Photoshop. If you don't know this, you're kind of stuck. And then what you can do, of course, is you can move this around. So notice if I move my red dot around, you would see certain things. Also notice if I were to delete the top two layers, I'm left with a yellow layer. And if you ever see these checkered patterns, the checkered patterns indicate that there's no pixels, meaning there's no color there. There's just nothing there. It doesn't exist. So if you ever see those empty pixels, it's not a bad thing. It just means you don't have any color there. And sometimes that's intentional, and you want to do that. That ends this first quick tutorial. Again, this is something you just want to practice, but you want to get that concept of layers down. And sometimes with layers, you start to understand it more when you actually jump into pictures and you start to kind of figure out how to use pictures. But until you understand how they work, you're kind of not going to get going in Photoshop. So this is what your final result is. And you can, of course, manipulate that depending on what you want the layer to look like and end up with a kind of a fun design. See you next lesson.